Mr. Demare, you going over the homework later?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's 5:56, so another 5 minutes and we'll begin. Oh, only Miss Bethel is in. Oh, no, I do see Miss Seymour.
Hey, Mr. Demare,
Hi.
how was your day today?
It was well, and yours?
That's good.
Oh,
Why
I
are
did
you
say
looking at me like that?
it's just weird.
There's a follow-up. There's a follow-up response or question today.
Okay, I'm wondering where this is going. I did send you an email.
I saw that email.
Okay, all right.
I just wanted to know we're going to discuss the homework later or no?
One or two, or both.
We have some debates on one or two of your questions.
Debate, sure. I'm always open for debate. Sure, we'll do that before class begins. In that case, let me bring up the homework so I can have it available.
There's also homework number 2 on the public and private
Homework number 2.
categories. Yeah.
Homework number 2. Homework number 2. Okay. Fine. Let's see. Questions. Nobody had an issue with the police force being public.
No, I think
Mailboat service.
mailboat service. I have a question about that. Okay. If okay, I see why it's private. If I do not purchase a ticket, then I'm not.
Right. Remember now, for it to be a public good, it must be non-rivalrous and non-excludable, meaning that it has to satisfy both those conditions. One, for it to be a public good, you can't stop someone from using the service even if they didn't pay, and you using the service doesn't stop somebody else from using the same service. Both of those conditions have to be satisfied for it to be a public good. And in the case of the mailboat service, no, it would definitely be a private good because they're not going to transport you or your goods if you don't pay.
So what about then the?
All right. So then PM public address, obviously right. Public. Bahama Golf Course, obviously private. Clifford Park, obviously public. The cloisters is debatable depending on what use. I did accept that if you're going to use the cloisters for some commercial activity, whether it's taking pictures or a wedding or a guided tour, yes, you have to get approval. If you or your family is just walking around on Sunday, you don't. So I understood the argument, and I heard my heart, but I gave everybody the free point for that.
Well, I heard your heart. I really don't think that currently they are allowing anyone to walk around freely. They prohibited that. I thought.
Unless they've done that in the last 2 weeks. Yeah, because I had some guests recently and we went over, but like I said, I was willing to accept a debate. Maybe that I caught them on a good day, maybe. But in any case, I said, okay, fine. It's not going to kill me to give away 1 point.
Yeah, I know.
Come close to killing me, but all right, fine. Oh, well, whatever. Atlantis fireworks. Clearly, even though Atlantis owns it, anybody can watch the fireworks once it goes up. So Sydney Poitier Bridge is definitely private. If you can't go over unless you pay. If you're in a car,
yes, but you can walk.
Yeah, but that technically doesn't make it. That doesn't make it public. The use of it's not a walking bridge.
You mean it have a sidewalk? It have a sidewalk.
And you could walk along any U.S. parkway, for free. But if you drive a car, you got to pay.
That's the same thing for the cloisters.
No, it's not the same. No. The fact that there's a fee associated with that bridge makes it private.
And if you're going to charge people to also go to the cloisters to use the cloisters, but then it's still free for persons who are walking around as tourists.
Well, see, the issue with the cloisters is that it's unclear. I think they actually want it to be restricted only to Atlantis and one and only Ocean Club guests. I think they are. If I'm understanding that correctly, they are converting that. But because Bahamians have been allowed to walk there for so long, it's similar to how a lot of us Bahamians look at beaches. I've been able to walk through this track road to get to the beach. You can't tell me this is your private land. I've been walking this way for the last 20 years. It's still private.
I don't see it that way, I guess, because of the fact is, if you're going to make a place such as the bridge accessible for both persons who, one, are driving and two, are walking, then it's a public. I don't have to pay if I'm walking.
But they didn't build a bridge for you to walk over it. It's that how can I build a bridge for cars and not have actually the sidewalks is only intended. This one thing I know for a fact. The sidewalks are intended so the cars don't hit the edge of the bridge. They would rather you hit the sidewalk because it's much easier for them if you smash your car on the sidewalk than you damage the bridge. They would prefer you not walking over the bridge. But there's no way to stop you. And since technically it's not illegal, but they would very much like for you guys not to walk the bridge.
So let me ask you, Mr. Demerits. Sorry, good afternoon. Just adding on to that, just for
somebody has some radio television in their background. Oh, that's Miss Mackey. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Hey, sorry, but that was me. Sorry, I turned it off. So just add on to that, just a question. So just trying to play devil's advocate, the crystal, right? So have you ever gotten in a car accident on the bridge, or have you seen it? The government that doesn't get involved, eh?
I mean, that's besides the point. The point.
So somebody could ask you to leave the island or come off the bridge if they really wanted to, right?
No.
Because that's how I was thinking when I was answering that question. Because I was thinking the same thing you was thinking, but then I was thinking about it. I was like, I think it's private because, on a security guard or somebody got to actually leave the bridge.
Why, if I'm already paying for it, how could they ask me to do that?
They could deny your payment. If you're somebody who they don't want on the island, can they stop you from accessing it?
No, because we're talking about the bridge aspect. You're not talking about the Paradise Island facility or the premises. We're only talking about the bridge aspect, I thought.
All right. Can somebody deny you access to the bridge rather?
No. Why would they deny me access? If they don't know my
reason isn't
intent in
important.
which to go to the or over to the bridge, why? How
The
can they
reason
deny
isn't
me?
important, Crystal, is because I was thinking the same thing. The reason isn't important is the fact that they can't.
I don't get that, but I understand your point, but I still don't get that. I mean, yeah,
look,
it's not built for pedestrians, it's built for cars. I get that.
Right.
And if you don't pay your toll, you don't get past. But I guess based on discussion with my colleague, we kind of thought otherwise because
that's cool.
you know,
Because
now,
no, because when I was answering, like I said, when I was answering the question, I was thinking the exact same thing that you was thinking, and I was just trying to
yeah.
figure it out, make sense of it, you know what I mean?
So my question, okay, so when they have like these fitness groups and stuff that walk the bridge, or people, you have to call somebody and ask them if you could walk the bridge today?
No.
Like, that's my point. That's what I say.
That doesn't matter.
But you're saying it's private.
No, what we're saying is just because they let you do it doesn't mean you have a right to do it. I let you use my property to get to the beach. I don't know if you remember, there was something going around on social media a couple of weeks ago where this guy put up a gate by Sea Beach Estates. And there used to be a little track road that goes to the beach that people have used for years and years and years. And that guy decided he was leaving too much trash around. So he put up a gate because it's his property and people carry him to war. Similarly, there was an ongoing issue on Paradise Island about access to Cabbage Beach. Yeah. And people are saying, listen, just because you guys, we've allowed you guys to do this, doesn't mean you have a right to do this. Privilege and rights are two different things. And the fact of the matter is, the bridge is private property.
Okay. So number 15. I don't know if anyone else wants to go through, but
the only other one I saw where people had various issues with is Solomon's Fresh Markets. Right, and a supermarket by any definition is a private good. You could walk through the door, yes, but you can't walk out with any of the stuff, not without paying.
But if the intent is not to purchase anything, why would I not walk out with it? I mean,
yes, but they could deny you access, even if you're saying you don't want to buy anything or you want to buy the whole store.
For all markets is what you're saying is private.
So, all supermarkets, yes.
Supermarket.
I can't imagine any public supermarket.
Okay.
All right. So that was the big. I didn't realize it would be such a big debate, but I'm very, very pleased that people are engaged. I'm assuming the quantitative stuff wasn't an issue for most people.
Except number 15. We kind of.
Except for number 15.
All right. Let's see. Crystal, would you mind if I use your paper?
That's fine.
Okay, so let me stop share this and let me share. Where is Crystal? It's just I happen to have it up. Okay, so here's question 15. I'm hoping you guys can see this. All right. So question 16 says, what price should Kelly's charge if they want to sell 17 pillows? Assume that Kelly's prices pillows in dollar increments, right? Which means Kelly's have decided for whatever reason, we only price our pillows in whole dollars, right? Fine. So we worked it out and it came out to $18.60. I don't know of anyone who had a problem with the actual calculation. And that's what you're going to find almost always with this class. The actual calculation, the math is not terribly difficult because this is not that kind of class. This is an analysis class. All right. So once you've decided that it's 1860, you know what Kelly's pricing policy is. So there's only two possibilities. The next two possibilities is they can either charge $19 or $18. Those are the next two whole numbers, whole dollar amounts closer to 1860. Now, we already said you can't ever go up because the law of demand says if you raise your price, the amount you're going to sell is going to go down. if you raise your price even to $19, you're going to find you're going to sell less than 17 pillows. And Kelly says we want to sell 17. Now, we're happy to sell 18 or 20 or 50, but we want to make sure we sell 17. So we need a price that's going to allow Kelly's to sell at least 17 pillows. And since we can't go up, the only place we can go is down to $18. That's it.
So why weren't any of my examples counted, I guess? My scenarios where I have number 2 that has the 1850.
Yes.
Is it because of my explanation, or is it
No,
like I'm trying to
it has to be a whole dollar amount.
Okay, that's why. Okay, so what I'm saying is, I guess the workings, you didn't specify whether or not the working should be a whole. We were just trying to, I
No,
guess.
it's not the workings. Hang on. No, hold on, Crystal. I think I did you wrong. Oh, okay. No, I see why okay. Here's your answer. Our answer came was 1860, which should leave the price at that same point. So all of your calculations, all of this doesn't get to the point unless you tell me the answer is $18.
Okay, Mr. Demerit.
The math is only to get you to the answer. I don't really care about the math.
Okay, but
And then
why?
you said show working based on our analysis given. If you did
Yes.
say to me there's no wrong answer, but if my support shows that I am telling you, I understand that Kelly's wants to give you $1 increments.
Yes.
However, my 3 examples shows that because you had stated 17 pillows, you didn't say a maximum or minimum. You said sell 17. I was of the impression that I should stick at 17, not more than 17. You never said higher, lower. All you said was 17. Now, that's not like the same example that you said 17 higher. If you had said higher, 17 and higher, then I would have justified my answer.
So what should Kelly's charge if they want to sell 17 pillows, knowing that they only charge whole dollar amounts?
Well, I understand the dollar amounts, right? But you also had a twofold question. And so I answered based on the twofold. 1, which is 17 pillows, and 2, a $1 increment. That's 2 different portions, 2 different questions.
But you have to get both of those right.
You didn't say that, Mr.
How can I ask you a question and you think it should, part of it should be, you should be able to get part of it wrong?
Because you said that in our class, if we show our workings, then quite rightfully, you can justify based on 1, giving you workings, 2, explaining your analysis, and 3, I mean, in this case, I understand where I went wrong. I'm not saying that I'm right with the explanation. However, I'm giving you 3 scenarios based on the first portion of the question that says 17 pillows.
Yes.
And I understand the $1, which is the second half of the question, but then to me, I wasn't graded fairly with 2 out of 10 points. A question that is 2 parts, and I'm only getting 2 points.
You got 2 points for the workings.
I have all my workings.
Yes, and you got 2 points for the workings.
Me too.
So what's the answer? What's the answer worth?
The answer was worth 8.
Nah, come on now,
Mr. Demerit. I completely disagree.
The working could
I don't agree with that.
Let me help you guys out. Let me help you guys out. All right. This class, all right, is an analysis class. All right. This is a thinking class. All right. This is the majority of points in every question is going to be based on your ability to show me that you understand the question, not that you can do math, because you've been doing math since 8th, 9th, 10th grade. Yeah, and I'm sure each of you have done college math or something of that sort. Yeah, and if you've noticed already in this class, I skip steps in the math because that's not the issue here. We're not doing a math class, we're doing an economics class. Right. So at this point, okay, fine. I can certainly say, all right, I'll be sympathetic and throw everybody additional 2 points. But you must know, all right, that the analysis going forth is what counts. The math is very pretty, and I love math. I love math than most people, all right? But it's the analysis.
You mean the answer? Because you're saying the analysis.
The analysis, your analysis is wrong, full stop.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so the analysis and the workings are 2 different things. I
But
understand
no,
that.
No,
They're not?
If you tell me, you know, you got from here to there, and I say, fine, but I ask you how. Are they not related? Not just the distance, but how you manage that distance? 2 parts of the same thing. Look, remember how we've done, and we'll talk about this in a moment when we get back to class notes, all right? We said whether you're doing a demand function or a demand curve, just 2 ways of looking at the same information. One is in a graphical form, and one is in a functional form, but it's the same information, all right? But if you tell me that, okay, I'm looking at this information, and the graph that you're giving me tells me a different story than the function that you're giving me, I'm telling you something's wrong. You
So you're
cannot
gonna
tell
mark
me.
it completely wrong, is what you're saying. If my graph is wrong, but my analysis is right?
I
Because I
didn't.
understand the connection. But if I'm explaining something to you, I may not be able to draw it.
If you explain it well, you will certainly get some points, but you can't get the full marks if the question requires both. Now, I'm not happy. I'm willing. Let me put it that way. I am willing to kick in a couple of extra points for this question for most people, right? If only so that we know going forward that, you know, how we should approach almost any question that we come across in macroeconomics or in microeconomics as well, if you go further, right? That the analysis is what's important. You need to get the math right, but the math is only a method to get to the analysis.
Yeah, I think my challenge is, Mr. Demerit, is homework number 1, where I really did not understand those curves, the PPCs, because I was of the impression that we could have illustrated based on an example given. And I do understand, I guess, the difference in that the analysis isn't aligned with what I had input into the homework, the illustration, the graphic. I need help with that, because based on your response given to me, I understood it, but yeah, I guess I need just help with PPCs and.
Well, what I do find with a lot of students, and that doesn't, this is no knock on you specifically, is that sometimes it's easier to see these things in class than when you get home and you're trying to make that connection on your own. And I do understand that, and that's certainly going to come from practice. We will have an opportunity. I will see if I can put together some sort of non-graded problems. I mean, I will mark them and everything, but they would not necessarily count towards your grade, maybe. Or maybe they'll count towards that extra 5% that I keep talking about kicking around. Right. I'll see what I can put together, and I'll let you know. We'll see what we can do by Monday. All right.
And then if you have time tonight, I would like to challenge later, if you do have time, on homework number 1, that analysis, that bonus point question. I would not say challenge, but I want to understand your thinking of that in mom and pops.
We might as well do it now.
Okay.
Homework number 1. Okay, and let's see.
That was a bonus, right? Oh no, I thought it was a bonus question.
Don't know. homework number 1. Oh, the last one, 15.
Yeah, that was number, one moment, top 7, number 7. Yeah.
And if you say, no, it wasn't a bonus. Actually, this was much more simple than people made it out to be.
And guess what? I went all out with my analysis thinking, well, let me explain. And I guess I understand your point, but let me explain. You said to me, based on the weekly wage bill analysis, that each worker is the cost, which to hire a new worker individually is $800 per week.
Yes.
Now, I did not split it into the week for the wage, but I gave you the month. Now, I mean, if I use in math and I'm telling you it's 4,800 for the month or for the week or 56 for the month, you're telling me weekly, I'm just telling you monthly.
Yeah. Okay.
So why?
What does the marginal principle say? All right, it's marginal benefit versus marginal cost. Right, the marginal benefit of consuming the very next unit of the good, or the marginal benefit of hiring the very next person, or the marginal benefit of staying open 1 more hour, versus the marginal cost of staying open 1 more hour, versus the marginal cost of hiring 1 more person, versus the marginal cost of consuming 1 more unit of the good. So when we're talking about the marginal principle, we're never talking about the aggregate amount. We're talking about the very next unit, because what we're saying is that, listen, if I'm running a business and I'm trying to decide whether or not I'm going to hire the next person, the cost to me of hiring that next person is their salary, not the total salary of everybody that's working for me. It's the salary of that next person. And the marginal benefit will be how much income is that next person generating for me. I'm not interested in what everybody else is generating for me, because I'm trying to decide, this person say that I have to pay them, $1,500 a week. Well, they better be making $1,500 a week for me, else it's not worth my time.
But you did say how many additional workers.
Yes. So you said, okay, let's say you look at that first worker. And let's say that first worker is costing me $500 a week, but they're making $700 a week. Okay, so I hire that first worker. Now I look at the next worker that comes along and I do the same analysis. Then I look at the next worker that comes along and I do that same analysis. Remember when we were looking at the service station? Right? We looked at each hour in turn to see whether it was worth us staying open that extra hour. We didn't look and we said, is it worth us staying open the whole 6 hours all at one time?
Okay, but my thing is, you're telling me there was only 800, and why am I not factoring in then what it's to now, which is the 4,000 for the wage and 7,000 for the revenue? Why am I just only focusing on 800 per week and the 700 for the revenue?
Because the wage bill is what is costing us for all of our workers.
So that's why I give you all of the workers. I said,
and we don't care about all the workers. We want to know whether we can hire this next person who show up on our door. I already hired the rest of them. I know what they're costing me. Do I hire Crystal? I have her resume in front of me. Do I hire Crystal? The fact that I get Lanique and Sanchez already working for me ain't got nothing to do with whether I can hire Crystal. Is she worth it to me to hire her? That's my focus, and that's the focus of any business.
Why was my analysis flawed? Because you said I'm saying to you that despite the revenue gaining more, the percentage on the employee for their weekly wages increased by the 10%.
No,
I'm still telling you that.
The marginal principle, your analysis is flawed from the beginning because you have your understanding of the marginal principle incorrect. The marginal principle doesn't allow you to look at the aggregate wage of everybody versus the aggregate revenue of everybody. The marginal principle, in its very basic form, says that you have to consider the next smallest unit. Do you work one more hour of overtime? That's what we're talking about. The marginal principle, remember when we, at the very beginning of what, 3 classes ago, we're using our definitions. We said we think on the margin. We think on small amounts. If you say, let's say you're running a business or even a supermarket, you say, you know what, I'm going to increase or change my price on this particular item by a small amount and see what happens. That's what we're talking about. So the marginal principle is all about small changes.
Right.
I'm sorry,
Well,
you
if I may say
got
so.
broken up. Sorry.
I just feel as if.
Yeah, but see, and again, that brings us to one of the key things that we're doing in this semester. We're starting at bringing all of us from our very disparate backgrounds and experiences into one common understanding that this is what we're talking about. You know, and that is where we need to focus our attention. That's why we talk a lot about sort of learning this common language. And in essence, it's like we each grew up with our own dialect, and now we have to learn the Queen's English, or the proper English, or whatever the word is. Right? That's what we're talking about. All right? We'll get there. Believe me, we'll get there. All right, folks, any more questions before we take a stab at some of our notes?
So just to be clear, Mr. Demaret,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
said that you're going to,
Sorry,
while I understand, on homework number 2, while I understand that I did get number 15 wrong, my analysis, sorry, was wrong. You said this time you're going to throw in those 2 extra points.
Okay,
for my working?
here is your grades. I'm sorry that you can see other people's grades. I like
you don't gotta put it out here like that.
You want the extra 2 points or what?
Oh, that's cool, Mr. Demaret.
Anyway, here, I've already given in yellow, given everybody the extra point for the cloisters example.
Right, but I ain't
All right.
talking about that one.
I know you're not talking about that one.
Oh, just checking.
I'm letting you see that's already in here. So if you look at your grades now, you'll see you got this is your 1 point compared to the rest. All right?
I didn't. Well, my name. Oh, thanks.
There you go. All right, so let's close that out and let's say that. Okay. All right. So, everybody good? Well, not good, but you know, better.
As good as we could be at this moment.
Sorry, Mr. Demaret, how many points you added?
2.
So where's my other point?
For I gave you
Homework number 2, right?
I gave you 1 point for the cloisters.
Huh?
And I gave you the 2 points for question 7 or 15, yes. So your grades would have gone up by 3 points. This is homework number 2. Okay. Now, okay, so now you should be looking at our class notes. Let's see if I can get our full screen. Why can't I get a full screen? Something's going wrong. All right, hopefully it'll fix itself. But you should be able to see. Okay, let's close that out. Okay, close that out. Close that out. All right, so back to our conversation yesterday, last class. All right, we were talking about market equilibrium. right? And it is important that we have a quick recap of our understanding of the definition of market equilibrium, what we're talking about specifically, not only because it's going to help with your homework, but also it's the kind of definitions that show up on your exam. I know we have a midterm exam coming up in what, 2 weeks? We'll talk about that again as we more closely approach that time. All right. So the 3 criteria for market equilibrium: 1, quantity demanded must be equal to quantity supplied. Right? You can't have market equilibrium unless you have people who want the product can get the product, and people who want to sell the product are able to sell the product. So demand must be equal to supply to begin with, and there has to be no pressure for prices to change. Right? Secondly, all viable transactions that can take place does take place. Right? And thirdly, government can't be involved in the process. Government can't be manipulating the market. Government can't be doing things like price controls. All right. So for us to have market equilibrium, these 3 qualities, these three criteria must be in place. Quantity demanded must be equal to quantity supplied, such that there's no pressure for price to change. All viable transactions that can take place does in fact take place. So what this means is that nobody's manipulating the market, right? Nobody has a monopoly, right? Nobody, no one individual firm can dictate the price or the quantity of transactions in the market, and government is not involved in the process. Right? Fine. Now then, we began talking last time. We looked at, we said we have a demand function, and in our particular example, our demand function was Q equals 20 minus 4P. And we know how we got that demand function. We started off with surveys of various products and prices. And from that survey, we got a demand schedule. Demand schedule allowed us, we then graphed that demand schedule to give us a demand curve, and also use that demand schedule to create a demand function. All right. So we have a demand function, and that demand function is associated with that demand curve. We say the demand function, a mathematical term, is it perfectly describes and defines the demand curve. It tells us everything that we need to know about the demand curve. Right? We also have a supply function that does the same thing for the supply curve. It tells us everything we need to know. All right? Now, because there's quantities and prices in both equations, we can in fact plot both curves on the same graph, and that's what we have here. Right? And when we plot both of these curves on the same graph, it is easier for us to visualize that market equilibrium would be where these 2 lines cross. All right. Say, for example, let's move forward so we can see how that works out. So let's take, for example, what I've done here. I have a table, and I have both the quantity demand and quantity supply. In fact, I combine the two tables into one. All right. So what we see is that price of 0, quantity supplied is 0, but quantity demanded is 20. When price goes up to 1, we know quantity supply is going to go up because price and quantity go in the same direction, but we know that demand is going to go down because price and quantity demanded go in opposite directions. So as price goes up, we see people want to buy less and less and less until at the price was 5, people don't want to buy any. But we see as price goes up, firms want to supply more and more to the market because they can get more for every additional item that they sell. Right? So these certainly, this table we've seen before, but it was broken up into 2 separate tables. Right? But what I want to show you here is that look at what I've done. I've graphed at, let's say, a price of 1, and at the price of P equals $1. Right? We draw a line and we see where that line touches the supply curve, and we look down on our quantity line, which is our horizontal axis, and we see at a price of $1, firm wants to supply 4 units. but at a price of $1, customers want to demand 16 units. We can see that from the table, but we can also see in our graph. So you can see that the information that we have in the graph is coming straight from the table. At a price of $1, firms only want to supply 4 because it's such a low price, but we want to buy a lot because it's such a low price. But clearly you can see that demand is not equal to supply. We have this large gap between how much customers want. Customers want 16 units, but you're only willing to put 4 on the shelf. So if demand exceeds supply, clearly this is a disequilibrium. In fact, we call this a shortage, all right, or excess demand. People want more than firms are willing to supply at the price of $1. So we can see clearly this is not equilibrium in the market. All right. What if we pick a different price? Right? Here we're looking at a price of $3. At a price of $3, we see where it touches the demand curve. And that tells us when we go down to the horizontal axis, at a price of $3, customers want to buy 8 units. Customers are demanding 8 units, and we can see that from the table. At a price of $3, quantity demanded is 8. If you doubt me, you can always work it out on your own, just to make sure that you understand how we got the $8. We just simply plug 3 into that equation. But we can also see at a price of $3, go all the way over to our supply function and our supply curve, and we go straight down, and we see at $3, firms want to supply 12 units. We can see that from our table. We can see it on our graph. At a price of $3, we only want to buy 8 units, but firms want to stock and sell 12 units. Clearly, this is also not equilibrium, right? Because they want to sell much more than we're willing to buy. So we have this gap between demand and supply. And in fact, because they want to supply more than what we want to buy, this is called a surplus or an excess inventory, but it amounts to the same thing. They are trying to sell us more than we're interested in buying at this price. All right. All right. But if you look at our table then, what we're looking for is we're looking for a price at which both demand is going to be exactly equal to supply. Because if you look at our graph at the very bottom on the horizontal axis, we said we're looking for Q star, which is what we call equilibrium quantity. And it's a quantity at which quantity demanded is exactly equal to quantity supply, and we're looking for one price that's going to make that happen. Because it's only at this one price. Price 1 was too low, price 3 was too high. There's only one price P star at which demand is exactly going to be equal to supply. Now take a look at your table, and let's see if we can determine what that price is. Right. So we're looking for a point at which demand is exactly equal to supply. So we see as the price is going down, we see, sorry, as the price is going up, the amount demand is going down, 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 but supply is going up, 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 up. But look at this point between $2 and $3. When the price went from $2 to $3, demand went from 12 to 8, but supply went from 8 to 12. So that tells us somewhere between $2 and $3 is the right amount. It ain't $2 because at $2, demand is not equal to supply. And sorry, at $2, we have, in fact, we have a shortage. Demand exceeds supply. But at $3, we have a surplus. Supply exceeds demand. So somewhere between $2 and $3 is the right amount. And now you see the problem with a table like this. A table like this just doesn't give us enough information. In fact, what I had to do, I had to extend the table and I decided, okay, let's look between $2 and $3. I looked at $2.25 $2.50, $2.75. And lo and behold, at $2.50, demand is equal to $10 and supply is equal to $10. So now we know that market equilibrium occurs at a price of $2.50. At $2.50, people only want to buy 10 units of this good. At $2.50, firms only want to supply 10 units of this good. So customers are happy, companies are happy, everybody's happy as long as the price in the market, excuse me, sorry, is $2.50. Right now, I could have broken this down into 10 cents, right, and go from $2, $2.10, $2.20, all the way to $2.90 to get the $3. Or I could have broken this down into 1 cent, right? So $2.01 all the way to $2.99. Yeah, but then you can see how it gets a lot more messy. Right? It just so happens that we ran into a table where $2.50 is a number that we can find relatively easily. So our next step then is, how do we make this whole process less cumbersome? All right? And the way we do that is calculating market equilibrium mathematically, so that we can stick right now, let's go back a second, $2.50. But we can in fact be able to stick any price in here if we want to be able to stick any price in here and see what demand and what supply is going to be and see what is occurring in the market. And the way we do that is that we're looking to find out what is the equilibrium, market equilibrium, mathematically. All right. So because both demand curve and supply curve are described and defined by the individual functions, all right, the point at which the curves intersect is equivalent to determining the price and quantity that's identical for both equations. All we're saying here is that we know that whether we're looking at this graphically or whether we're looking at it mathematically, we're looking at the same information. Right? Graphically and from a tabular perspective, right, we know that market equilibrium occurs when demand is equal to supply, right, or when these two lines cross. Now, the interesting thing is we said these two lines are not lines in and of themselves. These two lines also represent two functions. Our demand function, which is QD equals 20 minus 4P, and our supply function, which is 4P. So one of the things that we learned in mathematics, and you would have probably done it in 10th or 11th grade, I guess, depending on which school you went to, and that when two lines cross, if you can get a function for each of those lines, by setting those functions equal to each other and solving, it's the same as finding the point where the two lines cross. Right? And that's what we're hoping to do. We're saying, we know we can look graphically and see where the two lines cross. Now our job is to say, okay, we have these two functions, and the functions, if we set them equal to each other, it will be the same as seeing where the two lines cross. And solving those two functions is what we call solving a system of simultaneous equations. Right? And I'm sure you would have covered that at some point. Right? But just to remind ourselves, three-step process, right? And as long as we follow the step-by-step, we will be in the position, regardless of what the answer come out to be. If Mr. Demerit says it's wrong, then you got a point to argue. She said, listen, here's the step you told us. I did it step by step, every step of the way. What's the problem? Here's the step by step. Right? So we're looking at our two functions that we have up here, our demand function, which is Q equals 20 minus 4P, and our supply function, which is 4P. Step one is we set those two functions, QD equals to QS, set those two functions equal to each other, and solve those functions for the P, for the price. And whatever price that we find that solves those two functions, that is what we're calling our P star, or our equilibrium price. It is that price that we say is going to be the market clearing price. It's going to be that one unique price at which demand is going to be equal to supply. All right, so let's see. But quantity demand equal quantity supplied, and you can see here that our quantity demand is 20 minus 4p, and our supply is 4p. So we put those two together, so we're 20 minus 4p equals 4p, and since I like my prices to be positive, I'm going to take that negative 4p and put it on the other side to join that positive 4p that's already there. So I end up with 8p on the right-hand side, and the 20 stays on the left, so 20 equals 8p. And when I work that out, boom, 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 I end up with p equals $2.50. Now that it perfectly correlates with my table, price $2.50. So I'm pretty sure I'm on the right track. So now I've found my equilibrium price P star. So that's step one. Sorry. Step one, I found P star. Step two now is that once I've determined P star, or my equilibrium price, we substitute this into our quantity demand equation to figure out what the demand is going to be. All right. So we found P star, and we've done this in our homework. We take that price and stick it into our demand equation, and we solve it, and we see what happens. All right. So we start off with our equation as always, Q equals 20 minus 4p. And now we're not dealing with any ordinary P now. We're dealing with P star, or equilibrium price. So it's 20 minus 4 times 250, which is our P star. 4 times 250 is 10. So 20 minus 10, we have QD equals 10. So at a price of $2.50, quantity demanded equals to 10. Go back to our table and we see, yes, at a price of $2.50, quantity demanded is equal to 10. All right. Why does it 2 ones? There should be a 2. All right. Step 3 then says to verify. Just to make sure. Now, we may be really good in our math and we think, listen, step 2 is good enough for me. Once I figure out what demand is, I'm going to assume supply is the same thing. But for the rest of us, just to test ourselves, to verify at least for the first few stabs at these kind of questions, we're going to verify our calculations. And to do that, we go back to that P star we just figured out, the 250, and we substitute that into our quantity supplied equation. Because remember now, we know for that to be market equilibrium, quantity demanded has to be equal to quantity supplied. So now that we found what quantity demanded is, we found out was 10, we now test quantity supply. If it turns out to be something other than 10, then we got a problem. Okay? So to verify, we stick it into our supply equation and see what happens. Our supply function is QS equals 4P, but not any ordinary P. We're dealing with equilibrium price, which is P star. So we plug, which is 250. So we plug that in to our equation. We end up QS equals 4 times 250. And if you pull out your calculator, you'll find that 4 times 250 is 10. So now we know price, at price of 250, quantity demand equals 10, quantity supply equals 10. Now we know we have found market equilibrium. And we've done it mathematically. Now, just to reinforce this point, let's start the kind of questions that you see in your homework now. Let's work our way through the entire question that you will see on your homework, at least part 1 of your homework. Okay. So the San Salvador Yam Growers Cooperative, better known as SSYGC, it's not a real organization, just so you know, I made it up, has commissioned a study of demand and supply for their delicious yams and sweet potatoes. As a result, the following demand and supply functions will determine the best describe the market for yams and sweet potatoes in the Bahamas. Okay. This is the kind of stuff that happens in real life. I mean, this is obviously an example, but certainly you have companies who will go out and they would commission a study, right? Usually by McKinsey or some other company of that type. And they'll come back and say, okay, yes, this is the demand and this is the supply function for your specific product. And they may do it for a host of products and produce a nice little spreadsheet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we now have a new demand equation and a new supply equation. And the kinds of questions that you're going to be asked in your homework, and certainly going forward, would be of this type. At what price would Bahamians choose not to buy any of SSYGC products? So we don't want no yam and potatoes because they're too expensive. If price was not an issue, how many sacks? Now we're talking about sacks of yams and sacks of potatoes, not individuals yams and potatoes. How many sacks would Bahamians demand? If SSYGC charges 50 for each 25-pound sack, right? So we're ignoring the 25 and 25 pounds. That just tells us that is the size of the sack. That's neither here nor there in terms of calculation. So please don't include it in your actual calculations. I could have just put if SS charges 25 for each sack, right, if that would help alleviate any confusion. How many sacks would be demanded? If they wanted to sell 50 sacks, what price should they charge? And determine the price to the nearest 25 cents. So now their pricing policy is that we charge in 25-cent increments. All right. What price that SSYGC can charge and still sell no less? No less is the same as at least. Right. No less than 41 sacks. And at a price of $17 a sack, how many sacks would SSYGC? And I do want to draw your attention to these last 4 words. Be willing to supply. So guess which function you should use? And G, determine the market clearing price and how many sacks would be demanded and sold. Right. Just as one time, I'm telling you, when you see wording like determine the market clearing price and how many sacks will be demanded and sold, that should mean to you, find P star and Q star. Because the questions that you're going to get going forward, not the current homework, but further homework and your exams, you won't going to see it lay out as clearly as this. You may just see the beginning part. Determine the market clearing price and how many would be demanded and sold. And you must know that that means find P star and Q star. Okay. So that's these 7 questions, and the exact same 7 questions you have on your homework. So how do we go about answering these questions? First question, at what price would Bahamians choose not to buy any of SSYGC products? This should be familiar to us by now. We start off with our box. At some point, when we get comfortable enough, we're going to be able to dispense with the box because it'll be already so ingrained into our step-by-step process. But let's see. And we always said, what are we being asked for and what are we being given? All right. At what price will Bahamians choose not to buy any SSYGC products? Clearly, we're being asked for a price. So we're being asked for a price. So I put a question mark next to P. So it must be somewhere in the question, they must be giving me a quantity. And at what price would Bahamians choose not to buy any must mean that they're not going to buy none, which means they're going to buy 0. Right, so now I know QD is 0, and I need to find the price. We've done this already, and you've all shown that you can handle this quite well. We plug in what we know and solve for what we don't know. We know QD is 0, so I plug in the 0. So I know 0 equals 180 minus 3P. I like my prices to be positive. So I move that negative 3p over to the left and becomes a positive 3p. 3p plus 0 is still 3p, so 0 falls away. So I end up with 3p equals 180. P therefore is 180 divided by 3. And now I know if they were to charge $60 a sack, that's too rich. That's too rich for my blood. No, thank you. At price of $60 a sack, quantity demand is going to fall to 0. So at what price would Bahamians choose not to buy any would be if the price fell to $60. Right. Second question. If price was not an issue, how many sacks would Bahamians demand? Again, my box. How many sacks would Bahamians demand? Seems like they're asking for quantity. So somewhere there must be a price. And we've said if they tell me price is not an issue, then I see no reason why I should pay anything at all if you tell me price is not an issue. So I'm going to assume then that price is 0. Plug in what I know and solve for what I don't know. I have my equation Q equals 180 minus 3p. I plug in what I know. I know p is 0. So I'm going to Q equals 180 minus 3 times 0. 3 times 0 is 0. Negative 0 or positive 0 is still 0. So I end up with QD equals 180 sacks. If price was not an issue, the most I want is 180 sacks. Again, all of you have done this in your homework just passed, and all of you done it fairly well. So I'm not focusing too much in terms of how quickly we get through this. All right, and we said we're going to take out the 25-pound sack so people don't confuse themselves and then get vexed with me. Okay, so here we go. If SSYGC charges $50 for each sack, how many sacks would be demanded? What are we being asked for? How many sacks? So we asked for quantity, and they must give us a price, and the price is $50. Plug in what we know, solve for what we don't know. We always start off with our equation, QD equals 180 minus 3p. Plug in what we know p is 50. So we plug in at 50. We end up with 180 minus 3 times 50. 350 is 150. 180 minus 150 is 30. So if they were to charge $50 a sack, the most as customers are going to want to purchase is 30 sacks. Easy enough. And I'm leaving this, you have this in your handout from the very beginning of the semester, so you can go through it and use it as a template if you wish for your homework. And the fourth question, if SSYGC wanted to sell 50 sacks, what price should they charge? Again, what are we being asked for? What are we being given? We're saying what price should they charge? So we're being asked for a price, and they want to sell 50 sacks, so it must be quantity demanded is 50. Start off with our equation, plug in what we know, solve for what we don't know. We know from the question that QD is 50, so we plug in 50, so 50 equals 180 minus 3p. Since I like my prices to be positive, because I've never seen a negative price, I move my 3p over and it becomes positive, and I move the 50 over to the right, so I'm collecting terms, and that plus 50 becomes minus 50, so I end up with 3p equals 180 minus 50, 3p equals 130. Somebody check this for me, please. It's 130 divided by 3.
$43.33.
All right. So $43.33. Actually, it's $43.33 1/3 and $43.33. But since we're dealing with currency, with money, 2 decimal places, $43.33. Fine. Now, here's the issue. Determine the price to the nearest 25 cents that they can charge and still sell no less than 41 sacks. Right? What are we being asked for? What are we being given? we're being asked for price, determine the price. So we need to find a price. So there's 25 cents, but we'll sort that out in a second. And they need to sell no less. So they can't sell less than 41 sacks. They can sell more than 41 sacks, but they can't sell less than 41 sacks. Fine. So I know Q equals 41. Put that in our equation. Plug in what we know, solve for what we don't know. We know QD is 41. Plug that in. So we have 41 equals 180 minus 3P. Make our prices positive by moving the 3P over to the left, collecting the numbers on the right-hand side. So we have 3P equals 180 minus 41. 3P equals 39. And 139 divided by 3, please.
$46.3233.
Okay, so we're good. So now we went into the meat of the question. The price has to be the nearest 25 cents. $46.33 is the answer we worked out to. Now, eventually you can get to the point where you look at this and say, well, I know I can't go up. All right, so I can't go up to 46.50. Because the law of demand says if I right now at 46.33, it's exactly 41 sacks. If they charge 46.33, they sell exactly 41 sacks. But they can't charge 46.33. They can either charge 46.25 or 46.50. But we know if they were to raise their price, demand is going to fall. So if they raise their price above 46.33, demand is going to fall to less than 41 sacks. And that can't happen. So they can't go up to 46. So even without doing all the working out, the double checking each one, we should know, or we will know eventually when we get more comfortable, that since I know I can't go up, my only possible answer is going to be $46.25. But we can test both of those. Right. So we know the only two possible answers nearest to 46.33 is 41.25 and $40.50. Sorry, $46.25 or $46.50. So we plug each one of those back into our equation and see what happens. When we plug 46.25 into our equation, we get up with 41.25 sacks. And when we plug 46.50 into the equation, we end up with 40.5 sacks. Now, we go back to our question. Our question says we have to sell no less, we can't sell less than 41 sacks. So 40.5 sacks is not going to cut it. We need to sell at least or no less than 41 sacks. So $46.50 cannot be the right answer. The only possible answer is $46.25. And at $46.25, we sell 41.25 sacks, but that's fine. We just need to make sure we sell at no less than 41. All right. At a price of $17 a sack, how many sacks would SSYGC be willing to supply? All right. Despite the fact that all along we've been only using our demand function to determine what customers want to demand, when you see a question that says, how much would they be willing to supply, you use your supply function. That's the only time you use your supply function. Right? You're looking for, in your question, the word supply. Right? That's what you're looking for. Right? Because that's going to determine if, in fact, you're using the supply equation. All right. Once you've figured that part out, the rest is simple. What are we being asked for? What are we being given? We're being asked for how many sacks. So being asked for quantity, and we look at the question and they give us a price, and they said the price is 17. So we do the same thing. We put down in this case, we put on our supply equation, and we plug in what we know, solve for what we don't know. We know P is 17, so we plug that in 9 times 17, 9 7 is 63, put the 3 carry 6, 9 1 is 9, and 6 is 15. So we end up with a supply of 153 sacks. And the last question you will see is determine the market clearing, well, not the last question for your homework. Determine the market clearing price and how many sacks will be demanded and sold at that price. Right. So we said QD, we said there's a 3-step process. Step 1. We said QD equal to QS and solve for P. All right. You always want to go back, at least before you get more comfortable, go back and remind yourself, okay, this is a step-by-step process I need to go through to get this right. Step 1, set quantity demanded equal to quantity supply and solve for P. All right. My quantity demand is 180 minus 3P. My quantity supply is 9P. So I end up with 180 minus 3P equals 9P. Since I like my prices to be positive, I can take that negative 3P and bring it over to go with the positive 9P, and then with 180 equals positive 12P. And boom, boom, bang, 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 and with P star equals 15. If you have any doubt, plug it into your calculator, see what you come up with. Now we've determined our market clearing price, or what we call our equilibrium price, P star. We know, yes.
Sorry, Mr. Merritt.
Yes, ma'am.
We can try it again, please. You can do that again, please.
Sure.
Please, sorry.
We said
thanks.
Step 1, in finding market equilibrium mathematically. Step 1 says we set quantity demanded equal to quantity supplied and solve for P star. Right? Our quantity demanded function is 180 minus 3P. You see, we have that at the top of our page.
Yes.
All right. And our quantity supplied is 9P. We also have that at the top of our page. We set them equal to each other. So we end up with 180 minus 3P equals 9P. Right? That's how we get that. All right. Now we want to collect terms. All right. Since we have a negative 3P and we know prices are never negative, we want to make that positive. So we move that over to the right-hand side, go along with that 9P that was ever there. So we end with 180 equals 9P plus 3P. And 180 equals 12P. So to get P by itself, we divide 180 by 12 and plug it into your calculator if you will for me. 180 divided by 12. I'm sure you guys know your 12-time table.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So that's how we got our P star equals $15. All right. And we know now that this at $15, demand is going to be exactly equal to supply, assuming that we calculated the P star correctly. All right. If we've done our simple mathematics here correct, this P star should, when we plug that into our demand equation and our supply equation, should give us the same answer for both equations. Because step 2 says that, where am I? We plug we plug P star into our demand equation to find out what quantity demand is. And then to verify, we take that same P star, plug it into our supply equation to see what supply turns out to be. So we plug it into our demand equation. And remember now, we're not dealing with any ordinary P, we're dealing with P star. P star, we just worked out to be 15. So we plug that into our demand equation. We end with Q star equals 180 minus 3 times P star. P star is 15. So we end up at 180 minus 3 times 15. 3 15s are 45. So QD would be 180 minus 45, and that works out to be 135 sacks. So now we know demand is 135 sacks, assuming we've done everything right. Now to verify, we go on to step 3 just in case. All right. And we end up with, we plug that same P star into our supply equation, and that's going to tell us how much of sacks of potatoes would they be willing to supply at a price of $15. So we plug 15 into our equation. So we have QS equals 9 times P, but we're not looking at any ordinary P, we're looking at P star. And since we know P star is 15, because we just worked it out, we end up with QS equals 9 times 15. And 9 15s, plug it into your calculator for me, please, just to verify that my math is correct. And you get what? Anyone?
$135. Oh Lord,
Oh, that'd take forever.
I thought. I mean, it's there already, but
It's always good to double check. Every once in a blue moon, I might get something wrong. Every couple of years. All right, so that is the questions that you're going to find yourself faced with for at least the first half of the current homework. All right. Okay, any questions before we move on? So all we've done to this point is that we have set the foundation for our conversations going forward, our analysis going forward. All right. What we've done so far is economics, not macroeconomics. All right. Pure background, foundational economics. That's why you see we're talking about the foundational concepts. That's what we've done to this point. Now, what we want to do is now turn our attention to the basis of our semester, macroeconomics. And we want to start with what we call the big ideas in macroeconomics. Right? So we know for a fact that macroeconomics is the study of the nation's economy as a whole. All right? It's the choices made by individuals, firms, and the government, and how those choices may affect our entire economy. So that's what we're interested in. And the two big subjects we're going to focus attention on is the ideas behind economics, and we stress ideas. So I should tell you, we're going to be doing a lot more words as opposed to the algebra or mathematics or statistics, and economic statistics. Or economic statistics is called econometrics, by the way. So when we're talking about the big ideas in economics, we're going to focus on GDP, or gross domestic product. That's the first thing we can cover right now. Employment and inflation. These are the three big issues that affect any economy, and it allows us to better understand our economy and any other economy. Focus on those three big issues: gross domestic product, employment or unemployment, if you will, and inflation. We don't use cost of living because that's too narrow a term. Right? So we want to start with gross domestic product. Right? So macroeconomics is the study of the nation's economy as a whole. In order to study the entire economy and interpret its performance, we develop concepts to measure output, prices, and employment for the economy as a whole. Right? What we'll do is that we will lay the groundwork for the study of the nation's economy. We will study concepts, and we will do measurements required to discuss the functioning of the entire economy. So our job will get into a conversation about what's going on in the economy. And we will use concepts like GDP, employment, growth, inflation, etc., to allow us to have a more meaningful conversation about what's going on in the economy. It's important to know that our ultimate goal is to explain the behavior of the macroeconomy in such a way as to facilitate economic policy, right? We are going to be focusing our attention, we're going to have a lot of conversation about economic policy. Right? That's what we're interested in. Right? Everything else is sort of foundational to us being able to have that kind of conversation in some kind of meaningful form. Right? So, we're going to begin without the means to measure the performance of the economy. It would be impossible to analyze macroeconomic behavior and determine the effectiveness of macroeconomic policies. Okay. So how do we begin? We begin by making sure that we understand gross domestic product, or GDP. And I'm sure you've heard this before. You probably think you know this, and maybe you do. But we're going to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, same vocabulary, and the same grammar. Right? In our case, definition is very precise. I'm sorry, GDP is very precisely defined. GDP measures the total dollar value of final goods and services produced in an economy in a given period, usually a year. So GDP is going to measure the value of goods and services produced in the economy in a year. But GDP is going to measure the final goods and services. All right, so it's not going to focus on intermediate goods and services. So for example, if we're talking about this specific macroeconomic class, we would measure the value of the educational services as opposed to the value of all the, whether we're talking the laptops and all the other technology that helps us to get to that point. We would call those intermediate goods. And in that case, we will be measuring the final good, the final output, rather than the intermediate value of those goods. Okay. We're looking to measure the value of final goods and services produced in the economy, and there are three approaches that we can use, and three approaches that are used globally depending on the type of economy that you have. The first is called the expenditure approach. All right. And this is the approach that we use in the Bahamas. In this approach, we measure the value of the goods and services produced. So for example, inventory is the value of the goods sitting on the shelf, or cars on the dealer's lot, or the amount listed in your employment contract. And that's what we are. It is the value assigned to a good or service. We're saying this two ways. Here, we're only measuring the expenditure approach measures the value of the product, the value of your labor, right? The value of your land, right? The value of our factors of production. So the expenditure approach only focuses on the value. So for us in the Bahamas, when we're calculating GDP, right, they would calculate the value of the good imported into the country. It will charge you the value of the medical services, value of accounting services, value of banking services. Right? They're counting the value. So the expenditure approach just counts the value of the final goods or services produced. Right? Then we have what's called the income approach. The income approach is used predominantly in countries like the United States. And it is easier for countries like that because they have a very close understanding and very tight measurement of the income earned by their citizens and companies operating in that country. They have a huge bureaucracy, the Internal Revenue Service, whose only function is to understand the income of people living and operating in the United States. All right. So in the income approach, we measure the income earned, not the value of the production, but the income earned from the sale of goods and services. So instead of measuring the value of the inventory, we measure the receipt of the income at the cash register. Instead of the value of your employment contract, we measure the amount that actually paid into your bank account. So the income approach counts the money. The expenditure approach counts the value of the good. The income approach counts the money. Okay. So if you're talking, for example, a car dealer's lot, right? He knows the value of his cars or her cars, whatever it is, right? Because that's listed in his inventory, in his accounts. Right? When he sells these vehicles, right, that income is the income approach. So whether you're measuring the value of the inventory or the money you get after you sell the inventory, clearly that should be the same amount. So it's just two ways of measuring the exact same thing. The expenditure approach measures the value of the production. The income approach measures the money when those goods and services are now sold. Right? And the third approach is called the value-added approach. And this is where we get the value-added tax from, but in our case, we use value-added tax slightly different from the traditional use of value-added tax. Okay. The value-added approach then measures the value added at each stage of the production process. Right? And you do have some countries who mix both income approach and value approach in their calculation for GDP, but we're not going to do that here. We're going to try and make sure we understand exactly how the value-added approach works. So the value approach, we said instead would measure the value of every step in that production process from the time, for example, you dig the coal out of the ground till you finish with the final steel that you're shipping out of the factory. Right? The entire production process, or the entire production process from the time you purchase the land to the time from purchase the land, you plant your seed, you harvest, you market till you sell your grain or whatever it is. Right? Each step in that process is assigned a value, and the value-added tax really is intended to tax you at each stage in that production process. In our case, we don't use value-added tax like that. We use value-added tax as a sales tax, where the tax is just added at the point of sale. But traditionally, a value-added tax is a tax that's added at each stage of the production process. So let's walk our way through an example. I'm hoping you can see this. Hang on a second. Hang on a second, I'm going to stop this. Let me see, I need to fix this. Okay, good. Now, okay, you should be able to have a better view of this now. Okay, so example of a value-added approach. I'm sure you all know about straw vendors and straw market selling, stuff from China. But in the good old days, they used to sell straw work made in the Bahamas. And I'm going to explain it to you as to explain to me. I'm certain you guys can correct me if I get some part of it wrong. All right. So let's start with the end product, where you have a straw vendor with a stall in the straw market selling straw goods to tourists. Right. And we would assume, based on our understanding of GDP, that if we were to use the expenditure approach, so we measure the value of her inventory, if we ask her how much her inventory is worth. All right. And let's say she tells us that is worth $1,000. That means that when she sells that inventory, she expects to get $1,000. So whether we are measuring the value of the inventory or the money she gets when she sells it, it's going to be $1,000 either way. Yeah. If she says somehow she sells it for more than $1,000, then that means that she did not accurately value her inventory. Because if she accurately valued her inventory, she would take into account the fact that it is possible to sell that at a certain price. So the value of the inventory and the money she should get should be the same. In our case, let's assume that's $1,000. All right, now let's go back to the beginning. Where does this straw basket originate? It starts off as a thatch palm growing wild out on some family island someplace. All right. And how much is it worth growing wild in the bush? It is worth absolutely zero. All right. Now, on a lot of these family islands, you have some old people and some little children, because the parents have migrated to Nassau or Grand Bahama for a job, and leaving Grammy to temporarily look over the kids while they're in school. Right? Fine. So Grammy sent these little children out in the bush to cut palm tops for her. I understand they're called tops, fine. All right. And let's say she paid these children $5. Now, for a young child, $5 is all kind of money. You could buy cup and now and later and salty sausage and, you name it. Right? So you're happy to touch palm all day for Grammy. All right. So the value added to what was growing wild in the bush is now $5 because Grammy was willing to pay $5 for the cut palm tops. So far, so good? All right. What is she going to do with this now? If I understand this correctly, she's going to soak this in water or lime or whatever it is so it gets soft, and then tears it into these little strips, and then plait these strips into some herringbone pattern and roll that pattern into what is called a pinwheel. All right, that's at least that's told to me. I know somebody have a different word for it, but that's what I was told. Fine. Now, Grammy makes her money by selling this pinwheel. And every pinwheel she makes, she sells for, let's say she's selling that for $50. So she bought the cut palm from the kids for $5, and she sells the pinwheel for $50. That means she has added $45 in value to what she got from the kids. Does that make sense? And now what she has is worth $50. She bought it for $5, and in her processing, doing whatever she did, she added $45 worth of value to it, so now it's worth $50. Right? Now, Grammy content, she need to do more than that, and she in turn, she's the one that sells her pinwheels for $50. Now you have a wholesaler who collects all of this from all the Grammys all over the family islands. And he in turn sells that for $150. The same one pinwheel that he bought for $50 from Grammy, he turns around and sells it for $150. Because he's the one who actually went and negotiated with the old woman to get the pinwheel. So if he spent $50 to get it and is selling it for $150, he has in fact added $100 in value to what he got from Grammy. And then he in turn sells it to a retailer. All right. The retailer buys it from him for 150 and turns around and sells it to somebody. See, the retailer is probably in Nassau. All right. And he's going to sell it to somebody who's actually going to take that pinwheel and create something out of it. All right. So the craft person buys the pinwheel now for $300 from the wholesaler and makes something out of it, and makes what, bags or hats or little dolls, whatever. And in turn, the problem is that the craft person doesn't have a stall in the straw market. So, but they can stay home and they can make the stuff, right? And then in turn, they bought it for 300 and selling it to the person in the stall who actually has a stall for 500. So in essence, they have added $200 in value to what they got from the retailer. Now, the vendor who has the stall in the straw market buys it from the craft person for $500, maybe add a little shell on it, or maybe add the word Bahamas, whatever, and turns around and sells it to the tourists. What she's going to sell the tourists for? $1,000. Which means now she bought it for 500 from the craft person, sells this for 1,000. So in essence, she has added $500 in value to what she got from the craft person simply by having a stall in the straw market, so that she's the one with access to the visitors. So you can see now, at the end of the day, all right, she said, this, I sold it for $1,000 to tourists. Now, if we add up the value added each stage of the production process, all the way from Grammy paying the kids $5, we add them up and we end up with a total of $1,000. So all we're saying is that the value-added process of calculating GDP gives us, or should give us, the same answer as the expenditure approach or the income approach for calculating GDP. It's just three ways of measuring the exact same thing, so we're supposed to come up with the exact same answer, whatever method we use. Right? So the three approaches, you have the expenditure approach, which measures the value of the output. We have the income approach, which measures the value of the money, and we have the value-added approach, which measures the value added at each stage of the production process. So how do we use this? One of the first things we want to talk about when we're talking about GDP is we want to be able to clearly distinguish the kind of thing that is often lost among politicians and news reporters, is the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP. Remember, nominal GDP, real GDP comes from our reality principle, which says that what matters to us is the real income or purchasing power of money, not the nominal value. Similarly here, when we talk about nominal GDP, in our definition, is the dollar value of final goods and services produced in the economy in a given year as measured using current prices. Current prices is the price prevailing during that current year. So nominal GDP is very easy to calculate. Nominal GDP is simply calculated by taking the items produced during that year and multiply them by their respective prices. An example we have here, a hypothetical country in 2003, this country produces cars, boats, trucks, bicycles, and scooters. So this is an industrial country. And they produce 200 cars, 125 boats, 100 trucks, 1,000 bicycles, and 500 scooters. Right. if the cars are priced at $15,000 each, $15,000 per car, and we produce 200 cars, those cars should be worth 200 times 15,000, which is 3 million, unless my math is way off. 125 cars, 125 boats at 20,000 a boat comes to 2.5 million. 100 trucks at $3,000 a truck comes to 300,000. 1,000 bicycles at $200 a bicycle comes to 200,000. And 500 scooters at $2,000 a piece comes up to 1 million. When we add those up together, we have nominal GDP of $7 million. And it's not realistic, but it's the analysis that counts. So we know nominal GDP, very easy. The number of items produced multiplied by the price of those items in that year. Right? The price prevailing during the course of that year, the same year that the items are produced. Right, so nominal GDP is calculated by simply taking the items produced during that year and multiplying them by their respective prices. What about real GDP? Real GDP, on the other hand, all right, again, it's the dollar value of final goods and services produced in the economy in a given period, usually a year, but it's calculated using constant prices. Right? Nominal GDP, current prices, real GDP is measured using constant prices. So what is constant prices? Constant prices is the price prevailing during what we call a base year. Now, a base year is a year where nothing special is happening. So you look at the economy and you're looking for a year that's about as boring as it could get, right? There's no hurricanes, right? So nothing to disrupt the economy. There's also no recessions, no shocks. There's also no elections, because elections causes governments to overspend. So that gives a false impression of what's going on in the economy. So you're looking for a year where nothing much is happening. And we use that year as our baseline. That's what we mean when we talk about a base year. We're looking to use the prices happening or prevailing in that year as a baseline. All right. So real GDP then is calculated by taking the items produced during any given year and multiplying them by their respective base year prices. So this is the same stuff we produced in 2003, same number of cars, boats, trucks, bicycles, and scooters, but we're saying our base year is 2000, the year 2000, so we're using the price that's prevailing in the year 2000. Right? If you look at the price prevailing in 2003, the price of cars was $15,000 each. But if you go back to 2000, we find that the price of cars was $14,500 in our base boring year. In that case, then, we take our 200 cars multiplied by our base year price of $14,500 each, and we end up with a value of $2,900,000, not $3 million for our nominal value. And we do the same for boats. For 125 boats, the price in 2003 was $20,000, but the price in our base year was $19,750. And we worked that out, and we ended with $2,468,750. We do the same for trucks. In our normal year, 2003, the price of trucks was $3,000 each, but in our base year, they were $2,500 each. That works out to $250,000. For bicycles, in our normal year, the price of bicycles was $200 each. In our base year, we find the price of bicycles was $180 each. So that works out to $180,000. For scooters, the price in our nominal year, 2003, was $2,000, but in our base year was 1750. That works out to 875,000. So when we add those up, we see that real GDP was 6,673,750 compared to our nominal GDP of 7 million. The difference between nominal GDP and real GDP is that for real GDP, we're calculating the value of our production based on a base year prices. Now, 2000 was actually a base year for the Bahamas, but we've had a new base year of 2005, another fairly ordinary, fairly boring year. There wasn't any hurricanes or anything going on. Clearly, we couldn't use 2008 financial crisis. We couldn't use, well, can't use 2020 or 2019 COVID. Can't use 2022 either, because COVID's still hanging around. We couldn't use 2019 because of what hurricane, Dorian. Yeah, and you can go through and you can pick out the years that we just can't use it. And generally, the Department of Statistics, who are the one who determines the base year, they try and come up with a new base year every 5 years or so, because the economy is changing so much that, you know, what prices that may have made sense 5 years ago doesn't necessarily make sense now. So you can't have a base year that is longer than 10 years ago. Yeah. So what you will need to do for this coming homework, certainly, you'll be able to calculate nominal versus real GDP. And for real GDP, you're just looking for the number of products produced in a given year multiplied by the price of the base year. Right. Here's our definition of base year. It's a reference year which price in the economy is assumed to be stable. Therefore, by using prices prevailing in base year, we're able to ignore any change in price level and focus exclusively on changes in productivity. Okay. We very rarely hear talk by politicians or news reporters about the value of the Bahamian GDP. It's somewhere around 9 or 10 or 13 or 23 or 31 billion. You know, nobody talks about it anymore. We don't talk about it at all. You do hear a lot of talk about the growth rate of GDP. How fast is the economy growing? 2%, 3%, 5%, a quarter percent, minus a percent. That is where it's most important in terms of our understanding the overall economy and being able to have a conversation about economic policy. So we want to be able to nail down not only our understanding of economic growth rate, but more importantly, how do we go about calculating it? So the growth rate of GDP, we normally write as a lowercase g. Right? And the way we calculate it, very important, the same way you probably did this in high school, even if you don't remember it, is how you calculate any percentage change. The percentage change is always new minus old divided by old. But in our case, it is new GDP, which is, here we see GDP with a lowercase t, lower subscript t, is GDP in the current year. So for example, that would be GDP in 2021, because 2020 isn't over, we don't know what GDP is in 2022 is yet, right? So current year, T minus 1 is 1 year in the past. So it's the current year minus 1 year, so it's 1 year in the past, right? So the growth rate then, to calculate G, it's current GDP minus previous GDP divided by previous GDP. Or if it helps you to remember, it's new GDP minus old GDP divided by old GDP. New minus old divided by old. At least that's how I learned it in high school. All right. To calculate percentage change, it's always new minus old divided by old. You also would have learned in high school that you do things in the brackets first. So you do your in the bracket calculation. So you do your GDP at time t minus your GDP at time t minus 1. You solve that first. And then whatever you get, you divide GDP at time t minus 1. You do not do GDP t minus 1 divided by GDP t minus 1. Your answer is going to be, it's not going to make any sense. And then you're going to get vexed with me because the answer doesn't come out in a way that, you could put it on your paper and hope to get a correct grade. It's new GDP minus old GDP divided by old GDP. New minus old divided by old. So in our example, in the little box, new GDP, which would be the most recent GDP, would be 2001. So it'd be 2001 divided minus 2000. And then whatever you get from that, you then divide that by the GDP in 2000. Somebody with a calculator, if you wouldn't mind helping me. (9134640) minus 8923750.
Yeah, 210, 890.
Okay, so now we know that new minus old, it results in 210,890. So don't clear your calculator, divide that by our old GDP, which is 8923750.
I multiplied it by 100 to get my full percentage.
So you got 0.00236.
0.03, right? Yeah.
No, not 6. You got 235 something.
23, right? And then I multiplied it by.
No.
Oh,
Forget.
sorry.
235 what?
I got 236.
0.02363.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I just want to make sure that the 6 is accurate.
Right.
All right. So we're looking for 4 decimal places, 4 places after the decimal point. All right. So now you multiply it by 100 to get a percent, and you end up with 2.36.
There you go.
Okay. See. All right. So, and that's what we have here. You end up with 0.0236 multiplied by 100 to get 3.36%. So now that tells us that our economy grew by 2.36% between 2000 and 2001. All right. And that is what we're interested in, how fast or how slow the economy grew, as opposed to the actual value of the economy, which sometimes can be hard to grasp our heads around. And the last little bit, very interesting. There's no real economics behind it. It's just one of these mathematical oddities. It's called the rule of 70. All right. And the rule of 70 determines the number of years at which your GDP will double if it continues to grow at its current rate. All right. So that same 236% that we just calculated, if we want to know, let's go back one. You see, in 2001, we said the economy was 9,134,640. All right. It will, if using the rule of 30, sorry, the rule of 70, we say 70 divided by whatever the growth rate is, 2.36%. And he said it will take us, if we continue to grow at 2.36% every year, it would take 30 years for our GDP to double, or our GDP to go from 9 million to 18 million. Right. This is interesting because we can do this going backwards. Right. Here's a truism for you. The Bahamian economy has grown on average 2.5% per year. right? Some years it grows faster, some years it grows slower, but on average, 2.5%. Right? So somebody will calculate for me, please. Divide 70 by 2.5.
28.
28. So it says it takes the Bahamas economy 28 years, growing at 2.5% per year, to double. So if you go backwards, 28 years ago, our economy was half what it is now. If you hit the magical age of 28, just think back to where you were, back then. I can remember 28 years ago. Just a mathematical oddity. That, like I said, there is no big economics behind it. It's just one of those interesting things. Okay. How do we go about calculating the expenditure approach? Right. Remember, we said there's 3 approaches to calculating GDP. There's the expenditure approach, which measures the value of the output. There's the income approach, which measures the money. And then there's the value added approach, which measures the value added at each stage of the production process. The most common and most well-known approach is the expenditure approach. All right. The expenditure approach, we said, measures the dollar value of final goods and services produced or consumed in any given economy. Sorry, produced or consumed. All right. So who produces and consumes the goods and services? It's in any given economy, production or consumption is due, and that's no S, sorry. I missed something. Oh, for heaven's sakes. Okay, whatever. Is due to consumers or households, businesses, and the government. If you think about it, if you're trying to separate all the factors, all the variables, all the people in our economy, you can separate it into 4 broad groups. There's households. All right. Me, you, our family, households, private sector, if you will, households. Then there is the businesses, the business community. And then there is the government. And then there is the foreign sector. All right. Does that leave anybody out? Households, or individuals and households are the same, obviously. Businesses, companies, commercial sector, and government. And then you have the private sector. The external sector. That is your tourist sector, your Bahamians living and working abroad, foreigners living and working in the Bahamas. All of those would comprise your foreign sector. That's it. So if you try to measure GDP, then if you could measure the value of goods and services produced by each of those sectors, you could measure GDP. Right? And in fact, we have an identity, the GDP identity, where GDP equals C plus I plus G plus, and in brackets, X minus M. So which means, obviously, you clear your brackets first. Right. So let's start with each. The C is for consumption. Consumption is purchases by consumers and households. Right. We use I for investment, and investment, we just mean purchases by firms. Right. Anything that a company purchases would fall under this category, not just if they build a building. G is government spending, government purchases. And we very clearly do not include in here transfer payments. So we do not include NIB. Here we're talking about, when we talk about government purchases, we're talking about government spending money and getting something in return for it, getting value either in services or goods. Transfer payments is, you get money for doing nothing. Right? You get money because you had a baby. You get money because you lost your job. You get money because somebody died. Right? So what I'm saying is that I'm not necessarily knocking those things. What I'm saying is there's no exchange in return. Right? That's just money going out. There's no services or product being paid for. I know people would argue, well, we earn that, but that's a whole different story. All right, here, so we do not include transfer payments when we start counting government purchases. And finally, the X minus M, the X is exports, and the M is imports. Exports, we define very clearly, is foreign purchases of domestically produced goods and services. So we export, for example, scaled fish, lobster, etc., but we also export tourism services. So even though the tourists come to the Bahamas, this is foreign purchase of domestically produced goods and services. All right. So we consider tourist services exports. Imports, on the other hand, when payments or domestic purchases of foreign produced goods and services. Right. And we do have to bear in mind that net exports, which is exports minus imports, can be both positive and negative. So that value can be both a positive and negative value. All right. I do want, I do want to work through one quick example before we wrap it up, just so you can see what we're looking at when we're calculating a nominal approach to GDP. This is not in your homework. This will probably be in your Monday homework, or your Monday homework. No, it wouldn't be Monday. You get homeworks on Wednesday, don't you? It'll be on your Wednesday homework. All right. You will get a table like this. It won't be the whole entire homework, only part of the homework. You get a table like this, and you will be asked to calculate the expenditure approach to GDP. Right? And you see, right, GDP is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So you're looking for C. Consumption in this case, it's 10 million. Investment, where's investment? Investment is investment.
Mr. Demerit, sorry for interrupting.
Yes,
but before you even get into this, I'm still confused with the what is this now? The GDP real, and I'm kind of confused with the calculations that you have in the table there. Anyway,
real,
so I'll
real
just,
versus nominal GDP. All right, no, I have no issues. You may be, it may not be you, and you may just be the only one willing to speak up. So nominal GDP.
a nominal one.
Okay, well, I was going to start from the top.
Okay, yeah.
Nominal GDP, we just said, is, or to calculate nominal GDP, you take the number of items produced, right? In this case, let's say cars, multiplied by the price of each car, $15,000. And you do that for everything that you produce, right? And you just total it up, right? So the number of cars produced in 2003 times the price of cars in 2003. The number of boats produced in 2003 times the price produced in 2003. The number of trucks produced in 2003 times the price of trucks in 2003. The number of bicycles in 2003 times the price of bicycles in 2003. The number of scooters in 2003 times the price in 2003. That's the nominal. Very easy, very straightforward. The real GDP, though, is you're looking at your production in 2003, which is saying, you know what, the price in 2003 isn't suitable. I'm looking for a measurement, a price that is going to ignore everything else that may have been happening in the interim. Right? So just because we produced stuff in 2003, It may be there are other things going on in our economy in 2003 that may be skewing the price. We may have inflation as we are now. All right. So, for example, let's say we're talking, we're talking, and we're trying to measure the production of service stations in the Bahamas in 2022. All right. Clearly, they're selling the same amount of gas in 2022 as they did in, let's say, 2018. Right? But the price of gas in 2022 is so much higher than it may have been in 2018. Right? So if we're calculating the number of gallons sold times the price per gallon, you can see the amount will be very different, even if the gas station was selling the same amount of gas in both years. So what we're saying is that we're looking for a price that is going to strip out the inflationary impact. That's why we want a base year. We want a base year where there's not a lot of inflation going on. We want a base year where there's no hurricane going on. We want a base year where there's no election going on. All right. So such a year, the prices prevailing in such a year, it'd probably be a true indicator of what's happening in the economy. That's why we want the price in that base year. All right. So in this particular example, the base year that they have chosen is the year 2000. So to calculate the real GDP, then we take whatever the production is in our given year in 2003, but instead of using the prices that was happening in 2003, we use the prices that was happening in our base year, in our baseline year. That's what we do. So when you get your homework, you will see a couple of things. You will see the GDP in a number of years, and then you would see the prices in a number of years, and you would see the price in your base year. Sorry, go ahead. You were about to say something.
All right, the table is giving us several years for the real GDP, and then
Okay, tell you what. Let me pull up the homework.
It's not confusing me. I'm trying to understand which table am I working with, I guess, because your example isn't really working with the same I'm looking at.
Let me pull up the homework. Introduction, homework 3. Okay, so let's go with, let's see, introduction. All right, so you should be able to see this as homework 3, yes?
Yes.
All right, so 1 through 6, fairly straightforward. Well, you still gotta work your way through it, but you know. So, what is the value of nominal GDP in 2000 for Kurdistan? We said nominal GDP is just, you look at the number of items produced times the price produced. I mean, the price in that year, right? So nominal GDP for Kurdistan in 2001 would be the number of wool, meat, lamb meat, mutton, beef, cut flowers, and timbers multiplied by the price of each of those items.
Okay, so I'm ignoring this 2000 price and value. Because I thought in
no. Well, not for question 1. Question 1 is only nominal, right? Nominal GDP is the number of items produced in 2001 times the price in 2001. That will give you nominal GDP for 2001.
Mm-hmm.
Real GDP for 2001 would be the number of items produced in 2001, but you're using the base year price, which was 2000.
Okay, I see where you got. Okay, so
All
it's
right.
one real, one nominal, and then you have the real. Okay. Okay.
right. And of course, the growth rate, we said, is new GDP minus old GDP divided by old GDP. Right? So say, for example, you're looking at determine the growth rate of GDP, which is small g, in 2002. Excuse me. You see the second table that says GDP, Kurdistan GDP, real GDP in 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006.
Okay.
So if you're looking for the growth rate of GDP in 2002,
Yeah, do the
it will be
calculation. Okay.
2003 minus 2002
So, yeah.
divided by 2002.
Yeah. Okay. Now I see. I was trying to see whether or not you wanted us to do the calculation all one time, but I followed the question based on that and then answer. Okay. I was just at one point I thought I had the balance. I know you said something about balancing at the beginning when you used the straw thing example, but I thought it was the same thing, but it's not.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you're good now. At least you're good enough to take a stab at it.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
And question 6 is, of course, about the rule of 70.
Yeah, I see that.
Any other questions on the homework? All right. In that case, you know what? We'll call it a night tonight. You guys have my cell. So if you have a question, by all means, WhatsApp me. I am going to be off the island next week, but we still should have class Monday and Wednesday. All right, unless something goes drastically wrong, and I don't expect it to. All right, I think that's it. Oh, here, based on our conversations earlier in class, you see where top of your homework, prices are in Bahamian dollars and quantities in 10-pound bags of scaled fish. Right? We can ignore this 10 pounds does not come into any calculation that you have to do at all. Right? It would be the same as you saying quantities in bags of scaled fish. Am I making sense?
Yes.
All right, okay. Good. In that case, folks, then we'll call it an evening. Thank you very much, and I will see you guys on Monday.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Okay.